warm welcome, Mr. Goddijn. I'm always supposed to stand up and shake hands. So
where do you want me? Here?
Just right over there.
That's right.
So I got to be honest, Mr. Goddijn.
Can you say Harold? Is that okay?
Harold, I can say Harold.
That's great. Thank you.
I'm glad. My name's Elmer, by the way. So
Elmer.
Good for that personal connection. I have an exam in 4 hours, so to be honest, I'm a little bit stressed. Had to do this interview as well. And right now, I'm not really enjoying studying at the UvA. It's just a lot of work, and I'm curious, as the person with such an entrepreneurial drive and spirit, did you really enjoy studying here as an alumni?
I did, yeah, I did. I liked it. I did. Yeah.
What kind of student were you?
I was at Roeterseiland at the time in the economics faculty, and it was the first time I really enjoyed. The first thing I really enjoyed. I didn't like my primary school that much or college that much, but university I found a kind of a turn. Everything fell into place. I really liked it. Yeah, I was a student assistant, professor assistant, kandidaatsassistent. Made a bit of money on the side, so no, I had a great time.
What about studying, I guess, at the university was different than your primary school experience that made you enjoy it more?
Why?
Yeah, what was it?
Well, I think it's a combination of I think the most important thing for me was to meet different people with different backgrounds and from different walks of life. I think that was the most interesting bit, and then I kind of liked the study in itself as well. So yeah, it was a good combination, and the freedom and the city and the.
I mean, we usually get this idea of, I guess, these big startup, gurus. I mean, if we think about Mark Zuckerberg or these people that drop out of college and then pursue a startup. But when you were younger, I think you met with a couple of guys and you guys came up with the idea of TomTom. And just for the sake of the audience and the people to get an understanding of what the history was. But what was the initial plan with TomTom? What did it start as? What was its goal?
Yeah, well, it didn't start out as a navigation company. It started out as a kind of a small software business, more for business-to-business type of applications. So meter reading, barcode reading, order entry systems, quite narrow. And we didn't have a clear plan. We just started, and we saw kind of a need for this type of applications, and we just started, and we learned as we were doing. It was relatively an ambitious plan. It took us a while to figure out what we wanted to do in life.
Yeah. But how did you guys settle on the idea of the personal software devices to start selling and distributing to consumers?
So it was a bit of a journey. So we started in a business-to-business environment, and that was okay. We made a bit of money. We learned about technology and software and the portable computer devices that were kind of emerging at that time. And we liked that. What we didn't like was the sales cycle, very long. The size of the market was really small. A lot of customization. We wanted to do something a bit more scalable, and we moved into the consumer market, which was possible because there was an emerging category of personal digital assistants coming to the market, and we chose that emerging market to do some software applications and sell them through retail. And that was our kind of our first experience in the consumer space. And from there, we tried different things, and then we got we started looking at digital mapping as an application on those small form factor devices, which turned out to be a good combination. Mobile map and a mobile device was kind of interesting. And we learned to overcome some significant technical challenges to make that a viable commercial product. And that was, when was that? That was at the end of the 90s. Then we nearly blew it all, because one of the things with digital maps is that they're big and storage came at a premium at the time. So we decided to fix that problem. We decided to go online, and we thought it was a good time because there was the emergence of packet switch data networks and smartphones.
But what is something like a packet switch data network? Just for the
well, you don't remember that, but the older people in the room will remember that. If you wanted to set up a connection between two computers, you had a dial-up connection. So you had a modem with instructions, and you had a handshake, and it made this guy, the sound that a fax still makes. That was the sound that computers made when they wanted to set up a connection with another computer, and that was great, but not fantastic. And that soon switched to packet-rich data, TCP/IP. But TCP/IP was not available on mobile devices. It was not available. Was not supported in the mobile network, and that started to change. I think in 2000, around 2000 or something like that. And it was through exposure to those packet-rich networks early on that we started to think of a server-based service. Think about Google Maps before Google Maps existed.
Yep.
And we started to develop in that area. So we brought our maps or data online and hoped that an emerging class of mobile phones could connect to those servers to download and access geographical information. The thinking was that there were a lot of indices. There was a lot of you could search, but it was very hard to search based on location, and we wanted to fix that problem. So we started all that. We had some interesting products, and we came to the market, and we sold it initially through network operators. We had a great deal with Ericsson at the time, and and we were showing off our stuff. That's when we invented the name TomTom, and we moved on, and it was not very profitable, but from a kind of a technical product perspective, it had legs, But then, of course, you had the first internet bubble happening. So there was, I think it was 2001, and there were auctions taking place to sell 3G spectrum. And all the network operators felt they could, this was a life-threatening. The fear of losing out played a big role. So the prices for those licenses went up and up and up and up to unsustainable levels. And from one day to the next, when the CFOs looked at what they were supposed to pay for those licenses, and then they looked again in some detail at the economic model, very quickly the whole telecoms industry came to the view that they overpaid and they had to do something in order to survive. And that was the cause, the trigger for the first crash of the internet bubble in 2001, and the whole thing imploded, including our little business imploded as well. So we had to go back and and clearly we got the timing wrong for online services. So we decided to move back to device-based technology, and from that we developed the first consumer-grade navigation application for in-vehicle usage. And that was initially a software application that would run on third-party devices. And it was the first time you could buy something like that. It didn't exist before, and it changed the way people would start driving around.
When you say third-party devices, though, do you mean on the phones when you actually started to sell the software?
It was not on phones. It was initially on Palm, on Windows CE, PDAs, on Scion hardware.
Because I kind of think I want to touch mainly upon what the mapping software has kind of really developed into, and I think most people know it as, which is the download on people's phones. So what was the actual transition from the hardware devices, the personal ones that you sold, I think was the main manufacturing that you were doing, and that transition to the cell phone usage where people could actually download the software? I think it was the iPhone with 3GS model where you actually began allowing people to access it on their phones.
Yeah, but it was much later. It was 10 8, 9 years later. I think we were kind of forced by, we got our timing wrong.
Yep.
And we discovered that the hard way. We had to half the size of the business, close the hatches, start bailing, and come up with an alternative strategy. And the alternative strategy was to do what we knew from the past, and it was bringing software to the device themselves. And that's what we did, and that changed the world. We then went into hardware, so that was not because we wanted to be in hardware, but we wanted to really productize our product, make it easier to buy, to use, and install, and what have you. That came to the market in 2004, and that turned everything around. So we moved from a revenue of, I can't remember exactly, but we did about 2.5 million per annum in the difficult times. That grew over a period of 2 years to about 40 million euro. But then after the launch of the hardware, that grew to 200 million and 700 and more than 1 billion in a very short period of time. And that was, of course a defining, for TomTom, very defining.
But the defining moment of when you actually had to transition the software to personal devices, not the actual personal devices we had in our car, actually ended up backfiring a bit for TomTom as a company. I don't think it's actually what you guys decided to do, because by transferring to the phones, that allowed Google to also come up and start selling their software as well. And you were really relying on the personal devices, no?
No, I think when we did what we did, we knew from experience that at some point all this stuff would move online and would be accessible through the mobile phone. And surprisingly, that moment took much longer than everybody had anticipated.
You actually thought it was going to go badly earlier.
Yeah, we thought we thought in 2000 that it would move to the mobile phone. It didn't happen at that time. But we never had expected that we had a runway until 2008, 2009 to develop this business and this industry. So and we knew that, and it's not that we had a blind spot for all that, and we started to diversify. And I think the most important acquisition we did as a result of that vision was that we wanted to move up in the whole stack by also acquiring a map database and a map making company, in order to be able to support also use cases where on the mobile phone and not just on built-in devices and a personal navigation device.
Could we talk more about the relationship between TomTom and Google as a company? Just because I want to get that out of the way first, where recently Renault, Nissan, and Mitsubishi actually left, I think it was TomTom as a map software provider, and switched to Google. Is that correct?
No.
They didn't switch to Google?
No.
That's in 2021 though, it's that they expected to switch to
No,
Google.
look, there's a whole thing. It's true that Google wants to be in the car, and it's also true that they have breached the kind of defenses by signing up first Volvo and later FCA for some of their products. That doesn't, or not FCA, Renault, Nissan. But that's not a complete replacement. If you understand how the auto industry works, that is not, car makers don't want to be dependent on one vendor. They want to have choice. They want to have dual sourcing for all sorts of reasons. And one of the primary sins for car makers is to be dependent on one supplier for an essential component in your whole supply chain. And that's kind of true for software as well, although the nature of software is of course different, and the risk of being driven to one vendor is absolutely there. But I think it's also true that the car industry wants to experiment with Google in the car, what that means and how that's going to work. That doesn't mean that they go full out with just one vendor for all their cars and what have you, but in this case, Renault has chosen for 2 of their models to start implementing the Google software system as of 2021.
And this isn't a problem for TomTom?
It is, yeah, of course, yeah.
It is a problem?
Yeah. No, it is.
What exactly will be the implications of this for your company?
Well, if you look at the car industry, so the car industry is for us, it's a significant. By now, it's a significant proportion of our total revenue. Yeah, so it's an important part of our business. It's about 40 or 50% of our business is coming from the automotive industry, and importantly, we're growing there. So it's a growth area. We're winning market share. We're doing well. We're winning against our nearest competitor, which is a company owned by the German car industry, and which had a dominant market share, but we're chipping away on that. So we're doing well in the automotive industry. But now, again, the rules of the game are changing a little bit. And why is that? Because the car industry has very long wanted to have embedded software. They didn't want modems, and they didn't want to pay for data communication and so on and so forth. And there was an issue with safety and what have you. And we've been working, all of us, not just TomTom, but also our competitors and our suppliers and our partners, to bring great software into the vehicle. Now, the reality is that software underwhelms. It's not as good as what people are starting to expect, because they're used to mobile phones, and it's all smooth, and it's sophisticated. If you don't like it, it will be fixed in the next version. It's stable, it's bug-free, it's fast, and so on and so forth. You don't get that type of experience in the car. It's a bit old-fashioned, a bit clunky, a bit slower. Software's not always up to date. Data's not always up to date. And what people do, they're checking out. They say, well, that's all fine, but I'm going to use my mobile phone. And certainly that's the case in large proportion, not everyone, but I would think 30 to 40% of the customers driving in a vehicle are using a mobile phone for navigation. And that's a problem for the industry, for safety, and also it's a problem because the car makers are spending all that money and all that effort to bring something into the vehicle that they think is good, and then it turns out customers don't think it's that good as well either. So I've been trying very long, and it's under pressure now from the overall trends in consumer and Tesla and what's happening on the mobile phone. The car executives are saying, yeah, we can't carry on like this. We need to change the way we're working, but we don't know exactly how to do this. Let's bring in Google and see how that works and see if that changes the nature of the game.
Like just give cars faster software updates is kind of what the consumer wants.
Well, it's a different model, It's not, so to give you an idea. So if we want to win a contract in automotive world, we need to respond to an RFI, request for information, and finally a request for quotation, where we say what it's all going to cost and what have you. Those documents that we need to respond to are very long and very detailed. Some of them go over 3,000 items of specifications. And the trouble, of course, is that the specifications are wrong, nobody knows what's in there, it doesn't make sense. But that is the way the automotive industry works. Everybody needs to respond to that RFQ, and the one with the best price, quality kind that wins. Then you start developing, takes 2 years, then you need to start testing and hardening, takes another year. The cars comes out of the factory 3 years later, and then no one dares to touch it anymore because it's kind of, everybody's happy it's working in the first place. So on average, you're looking, if you have a car and you're looking at the software that's in your dashboard, the average lifetime of that software is about 5 to 6 years. Well, that is not working, and you can't do that anymore. And if there's a silver lining to the Google entrance into the automotive industry, then it is that finally they kind of understand that this needs to go online, server-based, based on modern software concepts and what have you.
Let's talk about, because you were just mentioning a competitor and how you're kind of digging into their share price is what you said. That was one of the things just before, the German automotive company. And I have a question because, the Netherlands really sees TomTom as one of this, I guess, largest industries, one of the best businesses that they've ever produced in the world. I mean, what you've produced. And as a CEO, I would say priority is also making sure that the shares are pretty consistent. And in around 2009, shares hit an all-time low, which was about 2.84 euros, and they went back up. But it's never really come back to that same level as it was before. No. Is that something that you're realistically trying to bring back? Are you trying to bring up those stock prices again, or is this?
Well, the share price is a result of what you're doing, your strategy and the products you're making, and growth and profitability and so on and so forth. So we're not focusing on the share price; we're focusing on the business. But of course, you try to do in the business the right thing, and if you do the right thing, then as a result, your share price will go up. So it's very difficult for me to talk about the share price, whether it's right or wrong, or why I want it. That's not the way you do those things. But of course, you are operating in a very competitive environment, and in that competitive environment, you need to figure out who you want to be and where you want to be famous for.
But do you think that we will ever reach those same stock prices ever in the future? I guess I understand that there's a lot more factors to it, but
I can't tell you.
You can't tell, I know, but just for the sake of it. There's another question I have, particularly on TomTom as a business.
The whole room would would be empty within 1 nanosecond if I said that I know a lot of things that make me, everybody would go out and buy the stock as well. That's not how it works. It works in a different way, and that is, you need to run a good business and grow and return profit or growth or combination, whatever it is. But that's how it works.
I do want to kind of appreciate the things that you have done for the company as well. Not to put you on this complete pedestal, but I mean, TomTom has been able to transform pretty drastically over the past 15 years. I mean, the GPS system, dashboard devices, to the high definition maps, and then now, I guess, entering the self-driving market, which is not something I think most people were expecting. Is this something that comes from you? I guess this innovative drive and this survival drive.
I think as a founder it makes it easier to make calls and big bets, but I wouldn't say it's all coming from me, no, but it is. I think change is in itself is the only constant in the world we live in, and that change is coming faster and faster, and being able to adapt to the change needs to be a core competence. And we've gone through a lot of change in the last 15 years, I would say. Yeah,
big change. I mean, you also had to change your telematics unit recently as well. And
we sold it.
Yeah, sold it.
Yeah.
Have these decisions been very difficult to play out in meetings at the company? I mean, also the idea when the share prices did drop, not to hinge on that conversation completely, but was it difficult?
Well, of course, it's nice if everything goes well and the share price grows and everything is hunky-dory and it makes life a little bit easier and sexier and more attractive. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. You have your ups and downs, and I think in a mature company you can deal with that. And there are other values that are more important.
Such as?
For employees and for everyone. Well, what is it I'm doing? Does it make sense? What is the purpose? What is the? Can I deploy my creativity, my skills? Is this a worthwhile company to work for? And do I like the culture? Do I learn? Do I? And what it is it I'm working on? Is it of interest? Is that a wider social impact? Can I see what I contribute? Those are the things that are for employees really important. And of course, share price is also important. Some of the compensation is based on share price. So yeah, you can't abstract from that. But it's not a primary driver what makes people tick and why people want to work for a company like TomTom or any other company.
Yep. We're hitting around the 30-minute mark. So if there's any audience questions the audience wants to ask. That man right there. That's my brother, by the way. I think he's got a...
It's your...
Oh, thanks for coming. I guess I'll stand up. I was wondering, you're already previewing kind of this shift to server-based, cloud-based. I'm wondering, in the transition to self-driving cars, it seems to me like we need 5G networks to be able to transfer the kinds of data that you need to have a self-driving car. So how do you see kind of these slowdowns with Huawei and other things in the future?
You took my question.
I don't think I think it will be nice and better networks, but it's not a prerequisite. We can do enough with the bandwidth that's currently is typically available. We should be able to get large volume of self-driving cars on the road in a safe way. If you have more bandwidth, you would do things differently. That would make things a little bit easier and speed it up, perhaps in some ways. But it's not an absolute necessity to have those networks. So it's nice that it's on the horizon. It's nice that it's coming. I don't know what the Huawei thing is going to change to that. I'm not smart enough to predict what the effects of the Trump assault are, especially whether it's long term or short term, or will that change the world in a significant way going forward. But as technology stands today, we can get those cars on the road. I think the more challenging bit on the self-driving car is to go fully automated. I think that's a hard problem to crack. So have a fully automated car without any manual or driver intervention or responsibility. It's a really hard problem.
let's actually transition to the idea of the future of mobility, because I do want to get to that question about the fully closed system from semi-self-driving to full self-driving. Before we get into that, could you just give a quick timeline of the self-driving future as you see it? How many years do you think it will take for, I guess, self-driving to develop in a Western country such as the Netherlands?
Well, I think you see. So in the industry, we have 6 levels of self-driving technology. It goes from 0 to 5. 0 is without any assistance, and 5 is without steering wheel and pedals. So complete handover to the computer. Now we are currently planning to bring level 2 to 3 of automation into the vehicle. And what that means is it's best to describe it as probably as, this cruise control on steroids. Yeah, so you say, you press the button, and then on closed access roads, so where you don't have bicycles and scooters and what have you, the car is able to keep its lane, keep its distance, can overtake, can go back into the lane, and can prepare for an exit ramp. Now that's major, because that's where most of the driving takes place. So those roads represent 6% of the total road network, so it's a small percentage. But it represents probably, depending on which country you are, 70 or 80% of all kilometers driven. Now, if we can crack that, that means, in theory, if that's robust and reliable, if you drive from here to Paris, you go to the ring, to the A something, you press the button, and then you have a fairly relaxed drive until Paris, if that's what your destination is. And you can actually start texting, making phone calls, read a book.
Is that legal?
You need to stay awake. You can't go in the passenger seat yet, because you need to be able to And when the alarm goes off, you need to be able, within a couple of seconds, to take control of the vehicle and do whatever is needed.
And if you don't, it just swerves off.
So that's a big deal. That's really big, and I think that's possible in the next couple of years. So 2022, 2023.
But that's still semi-self-driving. What about full self-driving? You said it's a very
much harder problem to crack.
Yeah.
Much harder, and it's so hard that it's very difficult to predict when it will come.
Do you have a guess?
Well, every year people make those estimates. It moves out by a year and a half.
Longer. Yeah.
And that's another way of saying we don't have a clue. Well, I don't think it's that bad. We can't know, but it's a really hard problem. And the original thinking was, because of all the excitement around AI and machine learning, that the original idea was we have a car, we put sensors, big computer, we drive gazillions of kilometers, and at the end, when we've done all that, the car will know by itself. And that is a strategy that's not going to work. The state of technology is not that far advanced to make that a viable strategy. So that means you need a lot of deterministic software. What if there's a cyclist coming, a pedestrian crossing the road, and the variability of those situations is so big that it's very hard to see how we can ever crack that based on the current state of where we are.
I'm curious about, because there's naturally technological hurdles that need to be overcome when it comes to developing full autonomous vehicles, but you've also explained that regulators are one of the biggest hurdles that we're going to face when it comes to self-driving. You said this in a conference a while ago, but do you have a prediction on where we might see self-driving first, the most in practice, just because of the fact that regulators aren't really hinging on it in that respective country?
Well, I'm not saying regulators are trying to slow us down, but there's a serious risk that the net effect of what regulators are doing, for good reasons, will slow down the industry. And regulators and politicians are notoriously bad at rating risk. It's in traffic. I don't know exactly the number. I can't remember it anymore. I used it in a previous speech, but it is.
There's like 3 buses.
It's a crazy amount of people who get injured and get killed in traffic every year. It's like, it is an obscene number. It's like 2 or 3 jumbo
Yeah,
jets full of people crashing down
Every
to Earth
day.
every week.
Every
you know?
week?
Every week. It's you would for air safety you would never accept that, and the same is true for trains. You would never accept that anything close to that type of risk associated to an activity. For driving, it's different because we're used to it. We see it as inevitable. Those individual cases don't make it into the newspaper. But it is, I tell you, it is an obscene amount of the cost of mobility in terms of all sorts of things, but also in terms of casualties and injuries and what have you, is obscene. So everything technology can do to make that safer needs to be encouraged, and for the developers, you need it's I wouldn't say it's trial and error. You're not going to trial and error. You're very conscious about safety and what have you. But invariably, there is an element of research and development involved in making those cars safer, and invariably, bad things will happen. And you hope it's not too often, and we've seen it in the past already with Tesla making headlines and other companies making headlines. And yes, it's bad, and you need to avoid it at all costs. But if the reaction of the regulator is stop doing what you're doing and go back to the drawing board, and we need to think this through, and we need to understand better and slowing us down for years and years and years, that's a real risk. You have seen that with the introduction of the car. In the early days, every car had to be, there had to be a horse with a guy in a flag in front of a car. It took years before buses were allowed because the regulator said you can't carry more than 4 people in a car. So from the car to the bus was, I think, insane 20 or 25 years, something like that, just because of regulation. And so there is a real risk that regulation gets in the way and will slow things down and will have unintended consequences. And I'm not saying that it's not legitimate that regulators look at it and that they are curious and interested and want to do this correctly, but there is risk, yeah.
I think it's definitely a legitimate concern. I mean, there's a number of pillars that naturally go into developing a self-driving car, and I think your high-precision GPS mapping is one of them. But if I were like on my bike outside and I get hit by a self-driving car, is that going to have any implication on TomTom as a company if it was a bug in the software at any chance?
Well, I hope it doesn't happen. But in this particular case, it would not be. We wouldn't be affected because we don't map where people are.
Yep.
That would be a bit difficult technical challenge to get that right. But we do map the road, and if as a result of a map error something bad happens, yeah, we can expect a Dear CEO letter. Yeah.
Dear CEO. A second point on the actual, I guess what regulators are trying to achieve is not just the actual accidents that can be associated with self-driving industry, but the actual jobs that will be lost in it. So in America, I think truck driving is like the 3rd largest employer of all people. Is it really realistic to understand to expect these industries to suffer tremendously as a result of self-driving technology? Do you expect that to happen?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know when it will happen, but I do think that eventually these types of jobs will be at risk, not from one day to the next, and it will go gradual and have you. But I think for truck driving, for instance, a good example, I think the driver is about 1/3 of the cost, petrol is 1/3, the truck itself is about 1/3 of the cost. If you can, that's the way how the world works. If you can save 1/3 of the cost for logistics and transport, that's very significant. So the drive to get those costs down will be significant. And you see larger trucks, you see trucks platooning with one driver and then 3 or 4 trucks without a driver following. Gradually that will eat also in the labor market. You don't see it today, but it will happen. But that's not unique to mobility. I think that's a trend you will see in many industries.
Do you think something like a robot tax might be able to stop it?
Maybe.
A robot tax?
I don't know. There's serious questions about the robotax, about the robotaxi, a tax on
The automation,
technology.
yeah.
I don't know. Again, I don't know whether that would yield any result. Honestly, I don't know.
Are you worried about it in the future, all these jobs?
No. Oh,
No.
am I worried about the jobs?
Yeah.
I'm worried about the speed by which those changes are happening. I think we need to accept that the world is changing, that the nature of jobs and the nature of work will change, and there's nothing that's fine. But when it gets and that's happened over the last 5,000 years. So, what is new is the speed by which it's happening. So you're in danger of when people can't grow with the new technologies, and you can look at whole generations that don't feel as valued or can't deploy their talent in the ways they've learned it to deploy it, and feel excluded as a result of that. And I think that's really bad. Yeah,
But
I think that's a real danger as well. And I think that's part of the explanation, that effect of why people are generally speaking a little bit nervous and happy.
understandably so.
And understandably so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very rapid process, and I think one of the reasons as well, I mean, at least something to be optimistic about what you mentioned before, is that the transition from semi-self-driving to full self-driving will take a while. And I'm curious, how exactly would that transfer happen? Because that seems to be the most difficult part to reach, right? You can have semi-self-driving, but complete autonomy, that seems far in the future. How do we transition?
The transition will happen through robo-taxis. So you throw a lot of money at one car, and that car will be very expensive, and it will be full of sensors and kit and what have you, and the car will then be able to drive in a relatively small geographical area at a low speed, and it won't make sense initially, and it will not be economical. But from there, things start to change. So the car is getting cheaper, the speed is going up, geographical area will expand. And then finally, you reach a state where this type of technology will be ready for mass production. But that will require many iterations and generations of hardware, software, and computing technology before we get there.
These self-driving taxis, they're equipped with LiDAR usually. I mean, that's an $85,000 kit to just have on top of the car, and to manage it, it's $100,000 to north of $100,000. Realistically, can we assume these prices to go low enough for the average consumer?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, if it works, and that is a route that big tech is taking. We solve the problem first, we get it to work, irrespective of the investment we need to make, irrespective of the cost per unit, we just get it to work. And then we start worrying about making it mass market. Then we start worrying about miniaturization, getting the cost down, and so on and so forth. First get it to work, and then yeah, and that's not the approach the car industry is taking. The car industry is coming from exactly the opposite end of the spectrum. They're coming from incremental improvements. So this works. Now we do next step, next step, next step, next step, and then they hope to arrive at the self-driving car eventually as well. Big tech is coming from the other end of the spectrum. First solve the hardest problem, and then make it economically viable.
And we're at the 45-minute mark, and I'm sure maybe someone has a question about that. Anyone in the audience? Right there?
Yeah, thanks. How difficult do bikes make your life when it comes to self-driving cars in Amsterdam?
He also took my question.
Yeah, bikes make it impossible. It's so bad that if you were very clever and what have you, and you program a car, and you would expect that one of the rules that you program in the computer is that you stick to the law. There are rules about traffic and what you. Well, I tell you, if you have a car that's programmed not to break the law, it won't get very far. And that's especially true in Amsterdam, of course. It's very subtle. when you go to a crossing, you look around, you look other people, and what is he planning to do? You push a little bit in front, so you give a signal to the other driver that you're really planning to start driving. You can go back if that's not resulting in the expected. So it's very subtle, and it's been part of human development over the last millions of years, and it was a way to survive. Making those decisions are deeply ingrained in our DNA and helped the human species to survive. It's that what the computer is up against, and computers make very poor tennis players. Computers make very poor driving machines as well, and we're trying to fix some of that. But it all remains very rudimentary compared to what the human brain can do in a very short period of time.
I actually have, for my next question, was literally that question, but it was the KPMG, which analyzes the the country's readiness to, I guess, incorporate self-driving. And the Netherlands ranks pretty high. It's around 4th on the list comparatively to other countries for the readiness to be prepared at the self-driving list. But if you're saying this about the bikes, why is the Netherlands so prepared for self-driving if it seems to be the opposite?
So why SD?
The KPMG, so it's Autonomous Vehicles Readiness Index, it registers the Netherlands at 4th place.
Yeah.
It's pretty ready, and if you're saying the bikes make it really difficult.
Well, as I said, the bikes problem is that is the last one on the list to crack. The first one on the list is the motorways. So we are kind of aware, and policymakers are aware, and we make good progress. Then we go to in the Netherlands the motorways, or the provinciale wegen. I don't know what the equivalent is in the English language. And then finally you go in city, and in city is the hardest thing.
The Dutch government Ministry of Infrastructure actually opened the public roads, I believe, for self-driving testing. Did TomTom have an influence on this?
No, but we have applied for a license to drive our own self-driving vehicle on those. And
now you're just waiting to get it approved?
Yeah, we're approving that. We're doing that in Germany. We're doing it in the Netherlands. And it's interesting because what you need to do now to get those licenses is getting more and more difficult very, very quickly.
It's getting more and more difficult. Why is it getting more difficult?
Well, the requirements that you need to comply with are in the beginning nobody knew what this was all about, and it was relatively easy to obtain a license for self-driving technology. Now awareness and understanding is improving, and regulators are starting to ask hard questions.
A little bit more serious.
How do you do this? How do you do that? What if? So yeah, the certification program is getting more difficult, and I think that's okay. I'm not complaining. I think we know more, and it's good that we take that serious and that we are serious about safety and what have you.
Back on the KPMG though, the ranking high for becoming a self-driving country, I'm not sure if you know about this, but consumer survey data found that actually the Dutch in general, as a people, are less accepting of autonomous vehicle technology than the average person. Are you aware of this?
No, I'm not.
You're not aware of this?
I always question those. I don't know what it's based on. What do? You go out and then you ask how accepting are you against self-driving technology?
I mean, people drive a lot of bikes.
Let me think. I don't know. I don't know what the value is of all that.
Yeah, just go for it anyways.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think if anyone has any more questions on mobility in general, if anyone wants to ask, you can ask one more question. You have plenty of time. You press the button.
Time? Can I just speak really? Okay, that's it. We're also experiencing this transition to electric vehicles. I'm wondering if you see these transitions as kind of exclusive and happening side by side, or if somehow self-driving cars is going to speed up this other transition that we also really need to happen.
Yeah. No, I think self-driving car, and there is a correlation and between electrification and self-driving technology, and that is because electrification will make the barrier to entry much lower for aspiring vehicle makers. It's very easy, relatively speaking, to build an electric vehicle. And it's relatively easy to equip that electric vehicle with the sensors and a computer and what have you. So it will broaden the number of companies that will get into the race for self-driving technology. And it will, importantly, open the market for a whole category of developers that have no roots in the car industry, but have a completely different view to software, computers, mobility, and so on and so forth. And the barriers to entry for those players are much lower than they used to be. And that will have a positive impact on innovation and the speed of innovation.
Sure, go for it.
Similar to that, perhaps, there obviously individual level transport is one of the main contributor to the CO2 pollution of transport in general. And the kind of the potential for optimization is more easy with mass transport, where you can make these investments, you have the companies who are in charge of it, as compared to individual level transport. And now there's these ideas are put forth, obviously, about kind of your private car becomes a taxi. You have these standing times of every car, and if you have the self-driving technology, it would go off, it would transport other people, it would come back by the time you need it. What do you think about these kind of ideas? Do you think they're feasible? Also maybe in light of the environmental impact of individual level transport?
Yeah, it's, self-driving technology in itself will not solve the CO2 issue, and will also, I hate to break it, but it will also not solve the congestion issue. And you could also build a case for the opposite. And actually, some studies suggest that the rising of Uber and Lyft and other on-demand services is actually contributing to congestion of the roads rather than reducing congestion of the road. So self-driving technology in itself will not, I don't think will have a major impact. But what will have a major impact is that we are building systems that connect seamlessly, where it's really easy to move from one mode of transport into the other, frictionless, based on software and information and mobile applications. So the need to own a vehicle is much reduced, and you see it already, and that's happening. It's the train has left the station, and self-driving technology and robotaxis will play an important role in that ecosystem, if you like. Because if you have infinite, or not infinite, but if you have a good solution for that last mile, that will have a significant effect on the other forms of public transport as well. So it's more the system. If you look at it at a system level, those robotaxis have an important role to play, I think. And what exactly the consequences and the effects of all that is very difficult to model. But if it is frictionless, if it's easy, if it's predictable and fast, and you can easily match and mix and match all those different modes of transport, then you start to make an impact in the overall mobility challenge.
I'm going to move away from, we can do one more question if that's possible, right there behind you, because most people here come for the future of mobility, I think, is the main point.
The main concern that has come up was the road complexity and the congestion in cities. So now, in, for example, Munich, I was interning at this startup that is currently constructing manned aerial vehicles. So little drones where people can inside and they fly from base to base. It sounds very futuristic, but this is a market that is supposedly very big, and also Google is testing a lot of devices in that area. So now the question is, how likely is that alternative going to be in the future? And has TomTom a plan to apply their products to this industry? Because obviously it's not related to maps in the same way.
No, it's different. And for us, it's all about timing. We got it wrong sometimes. Very difficult to get timing right, by the way. It's very hard. But this seems definitely a technology where we don't want to invest in at this stage. But of course, when it does happen, it takes off, literally. Then we want to We want to be ready and see if we can play a role. Now, vertical transport is notoriously expensive, and I can't see, how this will make a very big impact in a very short period of time. But it's one of those things, initially it will be hard and expensive and kind of difficult, and maybe you can develop that such a sophisticated way that it does become mass. I don't know the answer to that question, but it's definitely an interesting one. And what you've seen happening in drones, of course, it's a big inspiration for a lot of people. If you see how clever and intelligent and low cost those drones are now and how reliable, you can understand why people want to apply that to people transport as well. So I think it's a great development, great future potentially, but also big chance for it not to take off. I don't know, but it's. And I hear that Amazon is starting drone delivery now. Now, they announced it 4 or 5 years ago. Everybody thought they were completely barking mad. But now they're actually trying to do it, and you can start to see the logic of it all. So I think it's interesting.
Let's move to business in general, because we also want to touch this because you're the chairman of NL Groeit's Growth Ambassadors. Could you please explain what you do in that role first?
Yeah, we want to make sure that aspiring entrepreneurs who want to grow their business can find not sponsors, but can find coaches, can bounce ideas. What we've learned over the years, of course, that if you grow a company, if you grow it from 10 to 50, from 50 to 250, from 250 to 1,000. You have growth pains. You need to change your organization, and you need to figure out what you need to do. Now, if you can figure that out yourself and all by yourself, that's can be a long and painful discovery. But you can also learn from entrepreneurs who've done it already to avoid the pitfalls and to go faster and make fewer mistakes and get the confidence to do it. So NL Groeit is a coaching network, peer-to-peer learning. We try to match entrepreneurs with companies of a certain size with other entrepreneurs of a larger size who've gone through it all or have other similarities in each. And that is a coaching program. I think it's about 500 entrepreneurs a member of that. We have about 1,000 coaches or something like that. And that's and that's working. And people kind of enjoy that. They learn from that. They get inspiration. They typically tend to. It typically has a positive impact of the level of ambition that the entrepreneurs have. We have a lot of good entrepreneurs, but it seems that especially the Netherlands, the ambitions are not not as well articulated perhaps as in, for instance, the United States.
Well, how would you say the difference is, though? Is it just ambition? Because China and US both seem to be outcompeting Europe, and I guess the common idea is that you have a lot of scientists in Europe. We have the science, but then you have the Americans and the Chinese that are much better at commercializing it. How can we make that transition? Is there any way to bring up Europe to that standpoint?
Well, that's a tough one, I must say, and it's a worrying development. If you look at what's happening in the last, let's say, 15 years in terms of technology, it doesn't look good for Europe. It looks pretty poor, especially if you look at consumer-facing technologies and the underlying building blocks to come to the complete stack. It's all moved to the West Coast, or I exaggerate a little bit, but not much. Most of that has moved to the West Coast of the United States. And we are starting to get rule takers of what if you want to order a taxi here, it needs to go, or you want to look for a painter or whatever it is you're looking for, it goes through the services and technologies of a West Coast company, and I don't think that's right.
But do you, because I mean, you coach these small SMEs, right, on what they can do, I guess, to be innovative enough and have a large enough business to, I guess, get by. But is there any idea of what Europe should specifically do to, I guess, compete with this rapidly innovating world? Is it too hard of a question?
It's a hard one. The concentration of power and the knowledge, experience, the networks that have been built, the amount of capital that is available, it's very hard to see how we can compete with that over time. You know, and then there is a very quick, very fast technological development as well. And you hear, you know, and all that happened in a very short period of time. You get the whole AI onslaught on top of that, which is all driven from, again, from the West Coast. And there's a number of industries in Europe that are quite vulnerable. So far, it's been kind of limited to more the consumer-facing applications and what have you, mobile phones and search and social networks and news and you know the big things. But it's spreading now to kind of the physical economy as well, with the gig economy taking hold, also driven on platforms that are owned and designed and developed by West Coast companies. I think we're still very strong in Europe on industrial capabilities, but it's not at all certain that part of our industry is well protected against what's happening in software. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think the trends are not favorable.
We're kind of nearing the end of our discussion. I don't want to end on a pessimistic outlook on the future, but I'm curious. I mean, are you optimistic about a SME future for the Netherlands and for
Yeah,
Europe?
I am. And I have to be, otherwise I would be a very poor chairman. But we have a lot to go for. You know, you mentioned yourself. We have a lot of education is good, social mobility is still good. Maybe not as good as we want it to be, but compared to other countries, it's pretty okay, and we need to protect that very carefully. And that's a very precious part of the world we live in. There's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of drive as well, and we have seen good examples of companies that can compete at a world scale. But we're also very comfortable. We're very happy with our lives, and we're very happy with who we are and where we live, and we, you know, and that's not a good incentive for if you want to put the world on fire, you know, and you do that from a very comfortable position. You tend to take less risk. You tend to be less focused and less, you know, it's kind of, it's this or nothing. And you see some of that happening in Europe, and that concerns me, yeah.
Well, we have to conclude on that because I think we're out of time, but it was wonderful speaking to you. I will really follow the bike laws as much as I can now so we can get to that step as possible. But yeah, keep innovating. Actually, I do agree with you, the necessary need for SMEs, and hopefully that can change not only on a legislative difference, but also a personal difference where people really strive for the absolute best, because I saw that a lot in America, and I hope that I'll see it here as well. But in 2 weeks, we'll be speaking with Paul Mason and Mona Kaiser. I don't know the exact dates, but be sure to come to that as well. It was an absolute pleasure to speak with you today, and I'd like to ask for a warm round of applause.
Thank you.